Hiring managers, what's the cringiest thing a candidate has ever said during an interview? Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for the support. Years ago, I interviewed a candidate at a junior college for an electronics technician position. He failed miserably. The whole interview was him trying to BS me without answering any questions. Best example, I asked him what Ohm's law was. Answer, you want to know Ohm's law? I can tell you Ohm's law. I know it if you want me to tell you. Note that Ohm's law is the basis of electronics and electricity. Knowing it is like a typist knowing what a typewriter is. Yes, tell me Ohm's law in its most simple form. Almost the exact same answer, and he wouldn't actually tell me the formula, just kept saying how much he knew it and used it all the time. I would often spend an hour interviewing promising candidates, but I cut this guy off at 10 minutes. Get back to the office, and one of the guys comes up to me and asks if I know candidate X. Yep, interviewed him, and he's a definite no. This guy actually called the company and was trying to find out who to talk to get around the recruiting process. He called me the next day and asked me how he could get in with the company by circumventing the recruiting process. I got to tell him he was not qualified, and I was the decision maker, and the company would follow my recommendation. Next story. I was hiring for a construction company, and we were willing to train inexperienced people. Had a guy that had just dropped out of college, lived with his parents, never had a job before, and didn't have a car. I gave the guy an opportunity to sell himself to me on why I should hire him over someone that had a work history and a vehicle. He was 6 feet 3 inches. He said because he could reach things high up. I'm 5 feet 11 inches and was the shortest on the crew. Also, we have ladders. Ladders that he was standing right next to. Next story. My shop manager told me about a month ago about this interview he just had. Things were going okay. This guy seemed a little dull though, so I asked a new question. Are you pretty good with simple math? He said he was. So I then posed this question. What is 12 plus 37? He took a full 10 seconds of silence and staring at the floor before he said, I have no idea, man. This may not be the right job for me. Thanked me for my time and walked out. LOL. Next story. I once swore at a hiring manager in an interview. I thought for sure I'd blown the interview. To be fair, he swore at me first, and I literally quoted him back to himself. He hired me within 24 hours. He said he liked that I could stand up to pressure. I learned a ton in that job, and he gave me a great reference for my next job. Next story. Not a manager, but I saw it go down. Girl was scheduled to be interviewed at 10 a.m. Shows up at 3 p.m. in pajamas. Sleepy girl. Sorry, I overslept. Manager. That's okay. You can go home and go back to bed. Next story. We were having a group interview, and we were asked what we liked best about our last job. The gentleman before me answered that his last manager had really big tits. He did not get hired. Next story. Under qualifications, one person wrote, attractive. Another time, I interviewed someone who said, I could do this job in my sleep. I didn't recommend either of them. Next story. I'm not a hiring manager, but I was shown a fragment of a resume for the position of secretary. I want to spread love among the people I work with. Damn, they didn't hire her. Next story. I'm not a hiring manager, but I was in the cafeteria once where a candidate was waiting. He went up to me and asked if I had tips for his interview. I looked at him and told him I have no time for this since I'm hungry, and I don't have much time left on my lunch. He looked at me and said, it's okay, they'll hire me. I'm part of the alpha male clan. We always get hired. Needless to say, he wasn't hired. I asked my manager at that time what happened to the candidate, and he said the candidate came, sat down, and told HR it would be in their best interest to hire him since they could use an alpha male in the building. Next story. Not the hiring manager, but I overheard an interview in our kitchen where the guy straight up said he won't cook fish because he doesn't like it and doesn't know why anyone else does. Also thought he could outcook our sous chef during his working interview. Next story. Not so much what was said, but more the general demeanor of the guy. This was about a decade ago at a tech company for a security engineering gig. Prospective employee, about 30 or 35, shows up in a very dated suit, think early 80s, carried and took notes on his Radio Shack pocket computer from about the same time, had a Coke pinky, and twitched a lot. Had some other red flags on his resume, and we all took a hard pass. Next story. So in academia, candidates do sessions with all the faculty and even sometimes with students. I was a student in this one. The candidate kept talking about how they'd help our up-and-coming program, Meanwhile, we were a top 10 program for our field and ranked higher than the program she graduated from. She got the job, but a bunch of us definitely talked about how pretentious and insulting those comments were. Next story. I wasn't the hiring manager for this, but I was the crew trainer for this guy. I ran him through the kitchen, just the basics and then the register, paused and asked if he had any questions so far. This is typical. Training people can be weird. It's good to get a read on them early. He said, "What should I ask?" I'll be honest, I didn't really know how to answer that, so apparently we had something in common. He didn't last long for various reasons. Next story. I recently got hired for a retail position. During orientation, they gave us lunch, and the HR person sat at my table. She asked what my favorite thing about my former job was. I had mentioned working at Plus, getting laid off from a theme park, and I said, the days my boss wasn't there. What I meant was, my boss was a micromanaging, vague jerk who loved to gossip about other employees. So I liked the days with no pressure, but it didn't come across that way, and she very tactfully steered the conversation to other things. Open mouth, insert foot. At least, I don't see her often at work. Next story. Wasn't really a job interview, but close enough. Back when I was still in high school, a fifth-year English student had his final exam. Basically, he sat through class with us for a couple of months, taking notes on how to teach a class. Finally, the day came. 45 minutes to make it or break it. Guy had zero idea what he was doing. He was teaching a lesson about discrimination, and in the last 10 minutes, asked us the most ridiculous question I've ever heard in school. If they were in a burning car, and you could only save one, would you save a black person or a dog? And he legitimately called out a few of us to hear our answers. Class ended, and after 5, possibly even longer, hard years of studying, the guy walks up to his mentor and says, "I don't think this is for me," and drops out. Next story. It's really annoying when you decline a candidate, often due to skills mismatch, or because when they tell you what was wrong with the culture in their previous job, you know they'll have the same frustrations in your company, only to get multiple emails from them trying to get you to change your mind. The second thing that really irritates me is candidates who believe the recruiter is beneath them and only speaks to the manager during the interview. It shows how you will treat other people who you deem to be less important than you. Next story. My brother worked for a trucking company, and he sat in with a hiring manager as part of training. A hire candidate had a failed drug test on his record, so the manager asked about that. The guy explained that he was at some people's house he barely knew. While there, he was alone with a baby in the living room. Well, the baby gobbled up a sack of substances from off the table and started chewing it up. Naturally, the guy reached over to get the bag out of the kid's mouth. While he was saving the kid, baby bit his fingers and released the substances into his bloodstream. Thus, he failed a drug test. Next story. It wasn't anything the interviewee said because he barely spoke. However, his mother, who drove him and came into the interview with him, told me all about what a wonderful worker her precious little boy would be. Bonus, she made a follow-up call the next day asking more details about our benefits program. Next story. Okay, my mom was interviewing this guy with her coworker, and he kept bringing up that he worked for Mattel and was really high up there and did a bunch of stuff for Barbie. And he would insert a bunch of Barbie references out of nowhere mid-conversation. When her coworker asked why he was leaving Mattel if he loved it so much, he wouldn't answer. They are still trying to convince their board, who loves the guy, that he isn't the best candidate for the job. Next story. When interviewing for my current job, teenager asked me why I left my old job. Most simply, poor management. God, that was a ballsy thing to say, especially given that management at my current job is about the same. Next story. Interviewed a guy who was eating Cheetos and drinking a Hawaiian punch during the interview. He then puts his feet on my desk and asks when he starts. This was for a temp warehouse job. On his way out, he was hitting on some of the female employees. Didn't bring him on. Next story. Not so much any one thing in particular, but his response to every question. We had a group interview with a guy for a developer position, and every question we asked him somehow turned into a 10 to 15-minute response about his coworkers and the conversations he has with them. And the interview that would normally last 30 minutes lasted close to 90. We ended up cutting the interview short, if you can call it that at this point. Needless to say, we passed on him. Next story. Interviewing for a software engineering internship. I put down social engineering as an interest on my resume. When they asked me what that meant, I said it was learning how to lie to people. Next story. At our firm, we interview many graduates. Apart from one-on-one interviews, we also get them to do some group activities and problem solving. The point is not to see which groups solve the problems, but rather to watch the interpersonal reactions of the participants. One girl stood out as an outstanding candidate. Academics, extracurricular, work experience, presentation, top of the class in every metric. When the observer's notes came back after the group activities, hers just said, "Psycho bitch from hell." She didn't get a job offer. Next story. I'm not a hiring manager, but a small business owner. One woman described how many hours she wanted to work in order to stay just enough under the radar to still collect on her old employer's disability payments, while still earning the maximum she could from us. That resume went into the circular file. Hiring managers, what's the strangest occurrence you've encountered during a job interview? Next story. I was the person doing the hiring and interview. This was for an entry-level position. The boy we were interviewing had just graduated high school and had limited work experience, which is fine. His previous job was seasonal. He worked as a ghost in a haunted house. I wanted to see his skills, so I informed him that I would leave the room and he should hide and scare me when I came back in. I left the room and he hid behind the door, and when I came back in, he jumped out and yelled, "Boo!" Naturally, I acted scared, and I hired him for being a good sport. Next story. Taco Bell GM. I could tell within about 5 minutes if they were going to be a good fit. But the most memorable was a couple who came in for her interview, and he spoke for her the entire time. They were both dressed like they had been at Warped Tour in '08 and had just left a week-long festival. They looked greasy. So he's talking for her the entire time, and finally I'm like, "I'm sorry, but I'm interviewing her." And he goes, "Oh, you need to hire us both, and we'll need to work the same shifts." I said, "No thank you." They came back every day for 2 weeks until one of my 17-year-olds lost her temper and told them to buy something or go away. They weren't getting hired, and she wasn't going to come get me. I was busy. I bought her lunch. Next story. Where I live, everyone believes that anything is acceptable interview attire. Sundresses and flip-flops. One girl wore an extremely tight and short light gray dress with a jean jacket and sandals. When she got up to leave, there was wet, sweaty, perfectly outlined triangle of her girl parts on the back of her skirt. Next story. We had a guy come in, and as one of his examples of above and beyond is how he had to clean out a car with an incredible amount of vomit and described it in detail. It was hilarious. My manager wanted to offer him to a less skilled department. We decided to hire him for ours. He stayed with the company many years and did really well. Now he's a marketing vice president at a law firm. Next story. Had a guy who started off okay. Then he mentioned some pre-planned time off he would need. No big deal, but then he keeps going and going and going. He probably spent a solid hour telling me all the time off he would need, and he was acting like he already got the job. Eventually, I just asked him to make a list and send it, just to get him out of my office. So he sends an email, a mile long of time off he would need. He basically would have been at work about half the time. If that was the end of it, and I never saw or heard from him again, that would have been fine. This guy starts blowing up our office phone, angry that he wasn't selected. He then decides to call other branches of ours in other states and rant to random people who know nothing of this and have nothing to do with it. He then decides to call our corporate office and do the same thing. This went on for months. He was very delusional and obviously had some mental challenges. And by the way, his primary job at the time was working armed as a federal contractor. I couldn't believe this guy was allowed to carry a weapon. Thankfully, he never showed back up at our office. Next story. A woman threw up in my office trash bin 5 minutes into the interview. I tried to be of assistance, but she ran away. A man wiped a very visible booger on his job application. I circled it in red ink before I spoke with him. Next story. I wouldn't say I'm a hiring manager, but I am sometimes part of the interview process. The worst I've seen is someone come in and when discussing the role, essentially just refuse to do any of it. Like we explain the details and the person says, "Well, I'm not going to do that," to nearly everything. All the information was in the initial job posting. Nothing was a bait and switch. They just applied, came in for an interview, and then refused to commit to role in any capacity. Why bother even replying or coming in if it's not for you? Next story. Years ago, I was just an employee at a Dollar General. A girl came in for an interview, dressed in a baggy sweatshirt, pajama bottoms, and fuzzy slippers. I get that it's Dollar General, but come on, have a little self-respect and decency. Next story. Many years ago, I was sitting in on an interview. It was for a sales role that would revolve around women and the beauty industry. This gentleman did not interview well. We were nearing the end of the interview. He begins asking if he got the job. We'll let you know. He starts saying he should get the job. He starts demanding he gets the job, and at one point is slamming his hands into the conference room table yelling, "We must hire him. He'll do great. He's getting this job." It was bizarre, and it took us a while to get him to leave. Next story. Before legalization of substances, a potential employee had a substances charge. At the time of the interview, it was decriminalized. But since we work nationwide, the company has a zero-tolerance policy to be fair to all employees across the board. For some reason, a person with a DUI and fraud charge got onboarded, and how that happens in a sales role is beyond me. Next story. Had a really strange dude come in with his paper bag full of weed. I'm not sure what I was thinking, but we had him do an assessment test, and we noticed that he started getting really impatient. He started slapping the computer screen in front of him, at which point we asked him to leave. Next story. I hired at people from entry-level up to 20 years experience. Had a new grad apply for one of our entry-level support positions. Her mom decided it would be a good look to accompany her to her interview. I couldn't believe it when they both walked into my office. I tried giving her an out by saying, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like to have a cup of coffee and talk to my assistant while I speak with your daughter?" Nope. Mom told me that her daughter wouldn't work more than 8 hours a day, and if I made her travel, required per posting, then I would need to pay for mom to travel with her. There was more. I felt terrible for the poor girl, who said 2 words the entire time, "Thank you," at the end. Next story. I was interviewing a young 20-something guy. His phone kept ringing, and instead of turning it off, he just ignored it. Call after call after call. Finally, he said, "Hold on, let me take this," and answered the phone. Here was what I heard. "No, Mom, I'm still here. I'm in the interview right now." "No, I'm talking to them." "I don't know how much longer. I'll call you when I'm done." "No, Mom. Mom. Mom." "Okay, I'll call you." "Mom, I have to go." "I'll ask them." "I don't know, Mom, but I need to go." "Okay, Mom." I continued with the interview, and one of my get-to-know-you questions was, "What's in your car right now?" His answer? "Well, it's my mom's car." I was smacked. He did not get hired. Cut those apron strings, boy. Next story. I'm a smoker too, but some folks take it too far. Don't show up in a substances leaf hoodie. Don't show up smelling of drug, and definitely not both simultaneously. Next story. I work in HR, so it's a bit unfair. But around 2004, no smartphones, we had a guy get the wrong address to our building from a headhunter. Our building was in downtown Houston, and it was the summer. I guess he couldn't get a hold of the headhunter. Instead of just going home or finding somewhere indoors to find out how to call us, he wandered all over the downtown area on foot. In his suit. He finally showed up like 45 minutes late, covered in sweat, and looked like he was going to faint. The worst part? He didn't get the job. Next story. I had an interview where the guy was telling me and reminding me the whole time how he didn't want the job and wanted to work in another sitting. Kept finding ways to work that in. He had interviewed several other places, which is normal, but also kept saying that if any of them call him back, he won't be working here, and why he doesn't want to work in this setting, but then kept saying he'd do okay if he had to work here. It's a professional work environment and requires a bachelor's degree, with the preference being master's. So, we aren't talking some teenager at a McDonald's interview. Also, several interviews where their weakness translates very clearly to, "I'm going to be shit at this job." It's like the newer people haven't ever had any advice at all on interviews and how to ask questions. Can't remember the last time someone took notes, and many times, the don't ask any meaningful questions. Next story. I virtually interviewed someone that was insistent that 15 words per minute was extremely fast, and they'd be a great fit for the job. I've had someone rip butt in a virtual interview, and somehow carry on like I didn't hear it. Next story. I was front desk, but I have one. Guy comes up and checks in for his interview. I call the hiring manager and let the candidate know he will collect him in 5 minutes. He can take a seat in the waiting room. I instruct where anything he could need for prep is located. Guy sits for a moment, then steps outside, pulls out his junk, and uses the bushes as a urinal. There was a window right behind the bushes. It wasn't hidden, but did have a dark tint. It was the window into my space, so I had front row to this. Comes back and sits down like nothing happened. Never asked to use the bathroom or anything. I had even offered that if he needed a restroom, I could take him back to the employee restroom. The managers did ask me about candidate interactions at the front desk, so when this guy left, the hiring manager asked me how he was. I told him. Since he did this right in front of a huge security camera too, they were able to confirm. Next story. Had a guy come in wearing a full-length trench coat that he left on for the interview. Then, during the interview, he released the switch on his chair so he could lean way back and continually rock back and forth. Of course, he had to take a break from that once in a while to grab the bottle of soda he brought to take a big swig. Next story. Company I used to work for hired a lot of teenagers. We had a tiny application. Basically, you just needed to be able to talk, read, and write to get the job. It wasn't hard. There were 3 main high schools in the area. 2 of them had really simple names. One was named after a local historic figure. If you were a junior or senior, you had been in that school for 2 or 3 years. I was surprised how many teenagers misspelled the name of the school. It was not a complicated name. Those applications went into the file marked, "Do not hire." Next story. One individual asked if we had any colored people that worked for us, as he didn't like working with them. He seemed like a perfectly fine person, and honestly, we probably would have hired him if we had not asked the age-old, "Do you have any questions for us?" closing question. I was shocked to say the least. Next story. During my interview for an assistant principal position, there was a community member on the panel who was breastfeeding an infant. 11 years later, that baby attended that middle school. I once told him, "You probably don't remember, but we've met before." Next story. The interviewee heavily making out with her boyfriend in their car before the interview. My window had the full view, but I hadn't noticed until someone came in to point it out. Cops were called, not by me. The cops told us she was there for an interview. They left. She never followed up. Next story. So many stories. Here's one off the top of my head. Worked for a federal training program where we assigned people all over the world. So I was trying to see if this applicant would be a good fit. And my boss was really impressed with her. He wanted the entire team to go out to lunch with her. She brought along her boyfriend and rubbed the back of his head with one hand while eating with the other hand for the entire 90 minutes. Just bizarre. We went with another applicant. Another applicant showed up with her mother for the interview. They were both dressed as if they were on the way to the club. Skin-tight black dresses, 6-inch gold heels, lots of gold, necklaces, earrings, bracelets, lipstick, eyeshadow, everything gold and sparkly. At 8 in the morning. Were they on their way home from the club? And Mom got upset and started screaming at me when I wouldn't bring her back with the daughter for the interview. We can't disqualify a candidate based on clothing in the federal government, and thankfully we had a lot of other applicants that scored higher, but she actually was okay with the questions. Next story. I was hiring for event day staff, and my company was using software called High Review, where candidates use the software to video record themselves answering the questions. Got a lot of funny and embarrassing moments, but the best was one gentleman clearly completing his interview sitting on a toilet, like in a house where the toilet is in its own little room within the larger bathroom. Can't say for certain he was or wasn't using the toilet while interviewing, but could clearly see the tank lid and flush handle. Next story. So this wasn't exactly during the interview, but a few moments before an interview, I received a call from the applicant's mother asking that I treat her son kindly because he was very sensitive. As expected, the interview was a train wreck. We did not hire the applicant, nor the mother. Next story. Had a guy walk into my business and say, "Hey man, y'all hiring?" "Yep." "Awesome. I really need a win. My phone was stolen by this homeless guy, so I tracked him down and beat him senseless and got arrested for it, and he already sold the phone, so now I really need some cash. Y'all have an application I could fill out?" What the heck? Next story. Not too wild, but I recently had a guy ask me some questions while I was explaining the role, which was fine, but then said something like, "Okay, great. I just wanted to learn a little more about the company and position. That's all the questions I have," in a tone like he was saying goodbye. We're maybe 15 minutes into a 1-hour interview. I'm there. "Would you mind if I ask a few?" About 2 questions later, I was convinced this was not a match made in heaven and closed out the conversation. That's the short version. Basically, he was just very cocky and arrogant, and his skills and experience weren't at a level that he should be acting that way towards a hiring manager. Next story. Sat down with a guy about 15 years ago. Nice dude who was probably about my age. We have a good 5 minutes of back and forth. Then he laughs and says, "I'll be honest. My sister-in-law has been applying for jobs for me because she wants me to move out. I don't even know what you guys do here. and I'm sure my resume isn't accurate. Will you make sure I don't get this job? Talked for another 15 minutes or so. Nice guy. Glad I'm not related to him. Next story. I had a young lady come in and inquire about a job. She was probably 18. She came to the counter and asked if we were hiring. I affirmed we were and let her know she could apply by going online, and if she did so immediately, I could call her back as soon as the next day. But I wanted to ask her some leading questions just to get a feel for what kind of candidate she was. How did you find us? Are you still in school? Then her eyes wander over to our floor-length mirror. As I was trying to engage in conversation with her, she wandered over to the mirror and clearly started admiring herself, striking various poses, bending over, looking at her butt, and finally dropping a squat with a peace sign and duck face at herself in the mirror. She wasn't taking selfies, just posing. It was weird and hysterical. Obviously, no call back. Next story. Crocs with similarly casual attire. Word for word, copy and pasted bullets from the job description in their resume after giving an employee feedback on his first interview of it being a good idea to fix his bed prior or go to a different room with a better background. He just said a virtual background. All fine and good, but it was a picture of a sports car. Next story. I had a woman come in for an interview for an extremely prestigious fragrance shop dressed as Little Bo Peep. I had to call my district manager and tell her to check the cameras so she can see I wasn't making it up. Next story. Law office specializing in oil and gas leases. Candidate told us straight up that she wanted to work on the inside of an oil firm so she could work to destroy the oil industry because they were all corrupt and ruining the environment. Next story. My old director of operations told me that he had an interview with a girl and the girl kept taking napkins and covering her body with them. He could barely keep a straight face. Next story. A person didn't know who they were interning with. I guess they had multiple interviews and prepped for the wrong one. On the other hand, they were extremely well prepared for their other one. I hope they got the job. Next story. I was interviewing someone recently via a Zoom call, and I'm fairly certain they were just looking off screen and Googling the answers. That ended early. I don't know why people think they can do this. Next story. I have two. One that I thought was odd, and one that's just funny. I worked in a fast food restaurant, and my manager had the shift leads, me, sometimes do interviews. Two people come in, mom and the interviewee. He looked to be about 16, first job, not an unusual sight. His mother comes up and says her son is here for an interview. I call him over, and his mother comes over too. Odd, but okay. I start asking questions, and the mother did most of the talking. I finally kind of snapped and asked, "Is he capable of answering the questions himself?" And she responded, "Well, I'm his mother, and I know what he wants to say," with a smile. He did not get the job. Second time was when I was interviewing someone, and I asked about their availability. She said, and I quote, "I need 40 hours, and my availability is from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. I broke it down to her that if I could work with that, it wouldn't equal 40 hours. She just couldn't get that past her head. Next story. I interviewed a guy who kept slurring his speech and rambling. I figured he was drunk or on opioids since he was calling from Florida. His recruiter sold him as a diamond in the rough and demanded a very high salary. I rejected him on the basis that he was arrogant, probably high, and a bad fit. A few days later, the recruiter called back, lowered the salary requirement by $50,000, and said candidate will do anything for a second shot. Next story. I once worked for a large company, and my office had security measures such as 24/7 audio, video recording. When I wanted to have a touchy conversation with an employee, I'd have it in my office. Corporate could listen in at any time. As a fairly new employee, I interviewed a young woman in my office who was mentally off. My hackles were up from the beginning. Her blank facial expression, lack of replies to my questions, and roaming eyes were off-putting. It's like she was looking for something she'd left in my office. After a few minutes, I began to shut down the interview because something wasn't matching here. Then as I stood up, she said she had worked there a few months prior, and the last manager had fired her without cause. She said the manager bullied her and treated her badly. There was no emotion in her voice. Facial expression unchanged. I had to sit down and talk this woman down off of something she was going through, something she was reliving, and it was scary AF. It took nearly 30 minutes of talking about that bully/former manager to get her comfortable enough to get out of that chair and out of my office. Damn, a bully, especially someone in a management position. Next story. I once had a girl interviewing for a team lead position. When I received her resume, it was extremely odd. It had her picture on it, she was attractive, and under it was civilian status, single. I don't think I have ever in my career saw this on a resume. She called me on the way to the interview because she couldn't find the place, which was also odd because she already worked for the company. We were a satellite of the main plant about 5 minutes away. When she finally arrives and I begin asking my questions, she had no relative skills pertaining to the job, then informs me that she is 3 years sober and had been in prison. Now, being in prison is not a big deal, nor being an addict, but I don't think I would have played those cards in the interview. Chances are, because she already worked for the company, I may have never found out. End of the day, she wasn't qualified. And I had one guy who was overqualified. He had been in prison also, but had a lot of leadership skills, and to this day, one of my best hires. Next story, automotive repair. Hiring a car wash kid. Question, clean driving record and all? Answer, yepers, no problem. We offer the job. Tell him to come Monday with license and social for copies. He walks out. His mom is driving him. 1 foot out the door, he turns back in and asks, "What if my license is suspended?" Well, we decide to retract the offer. Next story. Had a guy show up 20 minutes late because he was sitting in the waiting area, sprawled on the couch, feet on the table, talking on his phone. Finally decided to join us and lead with, "I just got offered a lot more money, so you're going to have to sweeten the pot." Then sat back and grinned like he expected us to start bidding for him. We told him thank you very much, and we wish you success with your other job. Next story. Alzheimer's elderly gentleman. He came in and said he knew the owner and gave me Mr. X as his name. I asked why he was there, as I was the only one there, and knew there weren't any appointments to meet clients in our office. He said he needed some remodeling done. Partway through the list, I was texting the owner asking him if he had forgotten a meeting. He switched to telling me that the list was of all the work he's done. He goes on about needing a job and how he's worked in the field all his life. Twice he introduced himself, an elderly white man, with different Mexican names because he knew Mexicans are considered better than whites at construction. He kept bouncing around topics. I got him some water. He got very irate at the fact that the boss wasn't there on time for their meeting. I finally got him to calm down and let me call the boss. I called the police and explained that I had a very well-dressed elderly gentleman named X or Y or Z who seems extremely confused and angry. Can I please get someone to come talk to him? I told the guy he looked thirsty and I'd get him some water while he waited. It wouldn't be a moment. We waited less than 2 minutes. Several cop cars pulled up and 2 ran inside. They called him by a name he hadn't given me and said his wife was looking for him. He said he was clearly having lunch with his daughter and she needed to stop being late. She came rushing through the door in tears. They were at the restaurant on the corner when she left him with dessert so she could go potty real quick. He wandered off before she got back. Honestly, if it wasn't for the Alzheimer's, I'd bet he would have been a better choice than a lot of people who applied. Next story. I was the weird one. Interviewing went fine, but they decided I'm overqualified to work at a gas station and figured I would bail quickly. I get it. I was looking for any work just coming off active duty service. A few days later, the weekend, I'm mildly day drinking. I wasn't drunk or anything, but had a Smirnoff Ice in my hand. When I went into the same gas station to buy something, the interviewer's there, looks and recognizes me, smiles, but then sees the bottle. He starts yelling at me to leave, completely freaking out. I just started laughing, nervous habit, and quickly left. That was the day I learned drinking in Europe was way different than in the US. You can't just walk into the stores here like that. He probably thought he dodged a bullet by turning me down, and I have a mortifying memory. Next story. I was on the panel to help choose my replacement as a safety manager in a manufacturing site. I left for a promotion for another company. Part of the interview was a shop floor tour where PPE is required. When we stopped just before the entrance to the floor by the earplug dispenser, I took a pair for me and handed it me to the candidate. He looked at me with a completely straight face and said, "What are these?" And then, "How do I use them?" Safe to say he was not chosen for the job. Next story. I'm a front desk supervisor at an animal clinic. Woman came in for a work interview as a receptionist, and she's wearing white chunky heel boots with tight black distressed jeans and a satin top. The boots made me think she was ready to go clubbing. Strange outfit choice for an interview at an animal clinic. She also stated she couldn't stay for the full 1-hour work interview because she had another interview in 30 minutes. I ended the interview right there and then. I was like, "Thank you, but this is a work interview. If you cannot be here for the full hour, then we can stop right here." She asked if she could reschedule, and I said, "Unfortunately, no. Good luck on the next interview." She left. Applied for the same position again 2 weeks later. Guess the other interview didn't work out. Next story. I was hiring for a security job at a government site housing classified stuff. Our job posting specifies the private company the government contracts, not the government itself. An unremarkable candidate arrives. We discuss his job history. He explains the 6-month gap because he fled to Mexico to avoid arrest by the Canadian government since he was unvaccinated. Canada was not locking up people for that reason. He explained how he had to leave his passport behind so they couldn't track him. His girlfriend came with him because he didn't want to risk them kidnapping her to get to him. He explains he cannot talk about his previous employment at an empty jail that now functions as a historic site, since there are rooms that don't exist, if you know what I mean, he told us, matter-of-factly. We didn't have the proper clearances to know. We both hold top-secret clearance. He worked at a jail that had been a municipal institution 200 years ago. We asked what clearance he held. He said top secret. We asked for his clearance number. We each had one, and we process everyone's access paperwork where that number is provided and verified. He tells us he isn't at liberty to disclose that. We understand. Could he please state the first character of his security clearance number? He says it's 9. Security clearance numbers start with a letter. He has failed this check. We tell him we appreciate his professionalism and candor. We understand the importance of confidentiality, and this is a good sign. We decide at this point he is not a fit candidate, but we have time to kill. We ask about some other things in his resume, and he goes on at length about a suspicion of the government that we represent. Recites a bit of a manifesto he has developed against the government that we represent. We let him talk. We don't condone or endorse anything, but give him the room to explain himself. I ask about his 5-year plan. It involves a militia. By this point, we thank him for his attendance and relay next steps. We ask if he has any questions for us. He asks what we do here, and I provide the glibbest, "This is an office building. People do paperwork and that kind of thing." We were not an office building. He leaves. My coordinator and I both look at each other. My coordinator thought for a while the candidate knew all along what we housed and was trying to infiltrate so he could snoop around, but admittedly lost that impression once the candidate started speaking his mind. A few days later, the candidate reached out asking if we had made our selection. Not only did he mistake both our names, he got the company name wrong and let us know he would consider us for his militia if either of us has an interest and access to firearms. In the course of the interview, he mentioned about 7 different crimes he had committed, told about 20 discernible lies, and failed every verification check I had, while also showing a complete detachment from reality. Next story. Worked in a store that had a cafe that served regular and vegan food choices. Burgers were pretty popular. One applicant was a vegan and told the manager she absolutely would not be touching meat, cheese, or anything else from an animal. Next story. I interviewed a young man, early 20s, for a job as a commissioned law enforcement officer and emergency medical technician. He brought his mother to the interview, and she did most of the talking, answered questions for him, and asked me questions. He did not get the job. Next story. I asked why he was looking to leave his current role, and he tells me he's actually no longer with this company as he was fired for performance issues. I said I was sorry to hear that, and he literally started uncontrollably laughing and replied, "Yeah, it was a mess. Like you're trying to get hired for a job through me, right?" Next story. Had to call the cops on this guy once in an interview. A little context, my coworker did the calls, but we rotated who did the in-person interviews. Guy comes in for his interview, and a different person than the one he talked to on the phone introduces herself and says she is going to be interviewing him. The guy goes ballistic, screaming, "I'm here for Emma! Emma, is she here? She's back there, isn't she? Little idiot, come out here and face me. You know what you did." Guy would not leave. And as far as we know, he didn't know my colleague personally or anything. He came back a few days later and said some weird stuff to a different interview candidate outside about having a knife or a gun or something, and we had to get cops involved and circulated his photo to the security guards. Emma left us a little after this incident, and I think it was mostly because of this guy. Next story. Not a hiring manager. Just heard about it from someone else. Older guy came in, interviewing for sales associate. He would be on his feet all day, lifting heavy boxes, stalking and whatnot, and he tells the person, I can't stand for more than like 15 to 30 minutes. I can't lift anything over 10 pounds. I can't walk a lot. I need frequent breaks, etc., etc. For a retail job? Not sure why he applied there if he had those limitations. Next story. Local governmental agency. People wear ripped jeans and hey dudes to interviews now. Like, to the point where we're excited if someone comes in wearing business casual. But that's not the weirdest thing. We once had 6 people scheduled, called and confirmed the day before, sent a second confirmation email the day before. Everyone was so excited to interview. All 6 were no call, no show. We called and made sure they were okay. No one answered. Sent emails, no responses. Next story. I was on an interview panel of 3. The woman we interviewed started telling us how bad she'd be at the job, and how it's not even remotely close to she's interested in, and how much she wanted to do what her old job was. It was really interesting. Anyway, I voted no, but the other 2 voted yes. Shockingly, she ghosted after being offered the job. Next story. I'm not a hiring manager, and this wasn't an interview, but had an intern tell me they didn't actually want to work at my company and will probably completely change fields anyways. They did absolutely shit at work. Then at the end of the summer, said they were interested in staying and working full-time after graduation. I was like, well, your words and actions said otherwise. So I have him a very negative review, and we didn't hire him full-time. Next story. I've had mom bring in her son. I've had a girl come in with 2 of her friends waiting for her because they were going to the beach after. But instead of leaving them in the car, she let them sit in our waiting room in their bikinis, drinking iced Starbucks drinks. Mom bringing in her son was the worst because he was Indian, not Native American, but from India, and she kept yelling at him to sit up straight, stop thing, and answer, be nice to the man, me, etc. Was so bad I wanted to give him the job to get him out of the house. But I knew it wouldn't happen when she demanded he work 6-hour days because she was driving him to and from work and she didn't have time for more. Used to be we'd have Pi come in who didn't want the job at all, but needed the interview for unemployment, so they would sabotage things right off the bat. I've had people come in who smelled so bad you really had to wonder if they had showered the last month. We had a guy come in, and during the interview he apologized and asked if he could use the bathroom. Well, of course. No problem. Hey, can make that even worse, right? So I showed him to the bathroom, and literally over an hour went by before he comes out. The whole time I hear him playing games on his phone. I asked him if he is okay afterward, and he says, I cut it short so you wouldn't have to wait. Needless to say, he didn't get a call back, or even a continuation of the interview. Next story. Back when I worked retail, I got along well with the hiring manager. After they finished interviewing someone for a shift supervisor position, I asked them how it went. They told me that he had, or currently, worked in a particular industry, which paid much better than retail, and wanted to make around what he made in that job. When the hiring manager gave me the number he was expecting to make, it was almost double what the average store manager made in the company. I have no idea how he thought he had a chance of getting that amount, but I busted out laughing. Next story, not during, but after. Just a few weeks ago, we decided to hire a production associate we had interviewed. The guy dodged HR's calls for 2 days before calling her back 37 times in 1 hour. We just sat there and watched the phone ring over and over again. We decided not to move forward. Next story, it was for an entry-level help desk job. The resume I got had him listed as the CEO of a web development company. That intrigued me more than anything, and was 90% of the reason I called him in for an interview. Interview came and went, he never showed up. 3 days later, he called and said he was in the hospital and wanted to know if he could still interview. Sure, why not? Interview came, and he shows up wearing a Metallica t-shirt and sweatpants with a hole in the knee. Turns out, the company he was CEO of was that he made a website in WordPress for his friend's dad's sole proprietorship company. Next story. I wasn't the hiring manager on this, but got roped in to help. By the time I got there, it has been discovered that he had a PFA against a person that had just started not too long before. So I am basically babysitting him in a room until security gets there, while hiring manager is ensuring the safety of the other employee. And he starts making these comments that definitely won't get him hired. As they are escorting him out, he asks me for a rating between 1 to 5 stars on how the interview went. Next story. I was hiring for an analyst job, real heavy on using Excel and data management. Gave candidates an assignment to prove they could actually do the work. First half the interview, this guy had it. Panel loved him. Then I asked for the assignment. Straight up didn't do it. Tried pulling out all these things from a clipboard thing he brought with him. Told him I'd consider him if he came back the next day. Assignment in hand. Came back the next day, and I had one of the panel guys come back in. Dude again could not do the job, and kept pulling out pen and paper. We're talking about mashing thousands of rows of data and uploading them after formatting, and he wanted to do his work on a notebook. Them interviewee and panel guys start arguing as this guy has figured out he's not getting the job. Almost have a fight break out, he's so pissed as panel interviewer called him out for lacking the skills. Next story. I had a fellow come in interviewing as a steam fitter, for which his resume stated he did have his certification, but I'll never know if it was true or not. I was very new as a recruiter hiring for a local industrial site, and this was an interview I was holding as a preliminary before they met the hiring manager. Usually 30 minutes, but this guy was here for 90, so on to the story. His resume lists his jobs as paralegal, cabinet maker, steam fitter, electrician, IT security specialist, author. It goes on. It was like the list of jobs that would come up at the end of a local community college commercial. I was new in my career and asked some very basic, non-technical questions at the time. I asked this guy, "Tell me about a difficult coworker you dealt with." He proceeds to tell me a story about how when he was a lawyer, he would late at night troll the streets with a warm six-pack of beer in a backpack to help the local prostitutes and offer them legal help or a drink if they needed it. He was doing this regularly, but this guy was getting really agitated about his presence and started confronting him. Turns out this guy was a pimp and didn't appreciate him speaking to the ladies without buying. Anyways, he somehow got the guy to let him be, was the result of the story. So the difficult coworker he could think of was a pimp. I'll never know if it was a true story. The guy was a character, but he didn't seem out of his mind. I actually forgot about this until reading this thread. It happened so long ago, but it was very bizarre. Next story. I was a second-level manager. The subordinate manager and I would interview people together. Applicant shows up, other manager is nowhere around. I call him. He forgot about the interview and went to lunch. He will head right back. Not ideal, but also not the end of the world. Other manager shows up, absolutely stinking of weed. I was so embarrassed and furious. I ended the interview as quickly as possible and drove that dude to take a drug test, which of course came up positive. Technically happened during an interview, but had nothing to do with the applicant. It also explained why that manager was such shit in the afternoons. Next story. My father and I worked together as carpenters, and our schedule was getting way too busy. We were on the search for an apprentice. A friend's son had just left school and claimed carpentry was his dream job. We let him know where our next job was and to be there at 5 a.m. He got there at 7 a.m. Fine. It was the middle of winter and freakishly cold, and for a first day, I can understand the tough transition to such an early start. Dad put me in charge of him, I'm a chick for reference, and told me I make the call. He went fine for his first day until it came to the itty-bitty annoying jobs that he got assigned to do. My dad is very peculiar in his methods and likes things done a certain way. I walked in to check how he was doing, sanding miters, and he was doing it incorrectly to how I showed him, very much incorrectly. And when I said to him, "Remember, like this is how we do this," he says, thanks, but I'll do what I want until the boss tells me it's wrong. Women don't know a man's job. I went straight out to the van and said, "No, don't want him," and that was that. Next story. I've had this happen on 2 occasions. An interview candidate who brought their parent to the job interview, as in the parent was present during the interview. These were for professional roles, and both candidates had advanced degrees and were highly qualified on paper. Both times it happened, I told my boss I was no longer interested in hiring the candidate and refused to interview them. He ended up interviewing them. They didn't get the job. If you're an adult, act like an adult. Don't bring mommy or daddy with you for your job interview. Next story. The candidate gave a brief inclusion about his parents, which were also included in his CV, along with identifiers like age, nationality, ethnicity, and religion. After I questioned it later with HR, and apparently this was normal where we were working. This then teed me up for an interview later. The candidate had zero information about their parents, but the surname seemed really familiar. I asked the candidate to give me a minute. Asked a coworker, and yeah, she was the daughter of the holder of a significant contract within our largest customer. This would have been a conflict of interest, as she would have been working under that same contract scope too. When I started asking, she admitted deliberately left off the details because her father told her to do so. Next story. This is weird, but I've had 2 interviews go longer than 8 hours. Crazy, I know, but I work in startups and don't want to take a position without knowing as much as possible about the company ahead of time. I've convinced 2 CEOs to let me meet their executives, shadow training sessions, get showed their systems, looked at cash flow statements, etc. I was offered both jobs but turned them down due to what I found out during my sleuthing. I wonder if I'm the only one who does this. Next story. On an interview committee for a teaching position at my school. A teacher quit 3 days before the new school year. At this point, we were just looking for a breathing human being to fill this position. The candidate wasn't stellar by any means. Then we asked if she had any questions. She looked out the window and asked, "Are those Bradford pears?" Ugh. We had to interview more people. Next story. Controller here. Interviewing for a staff accountant position. Met the candidate in the lobby. Wasn't dressed well, but nice enough, but had a duffel bag and a backpack with them. I asked what was up with them, and the kid said, it's his personal stuff that stays with him. Security came over and asked to go through the bags. He declined. It was weird. I said I was comfortable going into a conference room with him and his bags. He just walked out. Next story. A girl graduated from our vocational school, and a company we worked with interviewed her for an entry-level position. She went in wearing a super short leather skirt and a Grateful Dead t-shirt. When she sat down, he could see her undie. He was pissed and called our school after the interview because they expected our grads to be more professional. When he mentioned the Grateful Dead t-shirt, our director replied, "Oh yes, we hand those out to all our grads." And we all laughed. As a hiring manager, what are the red flags when conducting an interview? Next story. Being late, especially without calling. Being significantly underdressed for the setting. Not answering the question that was actually asked. Unable to provide detail or examples to expand on bullet points in the resume. Lack of personal awareness, growth opportunities. Short, non-detailed answers. Did no research on the company or the job. Complaining about previous job, manager, co-workers. Shows lack of personal accountability. Never their fault. Disagrees with being held to standards. No curiosity. No understanding of why things were done certain ways. Unpleasant personality. Some of these are things that might not be so bad in a single answer, but are red flags if they show up as a pattern. Next story. I'll never forget a job I had decades ago. I didn't do the interview, but my coworker later told me that at the end, the applicant joked, "If you don't hire me, I'll have to kill you." This was right before workplace shootings became common, but still, it didn't sit well with the interviewers. Guy was not hired. Next story. Sounds polished, but lacks depth or specifics when you dig deeper. Not asking questions. Strong candidates are usually curious about the role, team, or impact. Next story. One of my best interviews recently was because she asked several questions about the job. She wasn't just trying to get the job, she was making sure the job was going to be a good fit for her, as well as making sure she would be a good fit for the job. Don't BS. Be okay saying, "I don't know a lot about that, but I am willing to learn." Honesty goes a long way. It might lead to me deciding you don't know enough about the job, but if you lie, say you know everything, then I'm not going to trust you. I can teach skills. I can't teach you not to be a piece of shit. Next story. Sigh. The interview is for the best actors. If you are introverted, socially challenged, reserved, you are doomed. Interviewers are looking for the perfect human, and that takes great acting. Next story. Rehearsed, rigid speech. I can ignore this for socially challenged people. If the role function doesn't require stakeholder oral. Obnoxious. You're lucky to have me attitude. Or lack of understanding when it comes to relative bargaining position. Zero relevant questions asked. A personal red flag is the inability to be concise, with or without overuse of filler phrases like, you know, or habitual tick words. For example, cadence was one case I remember. Next story. Aside from the obvious ones that have already been mentioned, I'll add in 2. 1. Arrogance. Once had the smuggest, most arrogant sob interview for a job in my office. Hated him from the moment he opened his mouth. Even had the gall to say something like, "If you're going to hire me, you better do it quickly," because he was in line for a promotion at his current job. He got neither the job nor the promotion. 2. Being careless with what you say. Had a candidate for the admin of my office make a snide remark about dealing with that generation, referring to Gen Z. I work at a college where about half of the students we serve are Gen Z. Next story. Answers that appear well-polished but do not actually address the question or lack substance. A lot of jargon that makes little sense. Bad-mouthing previous employers or colleagues. Next story. Instant complaining. The usual is about the platform, Teams. A candidate will bitch about how impersonal it is or why we chose to use it. There's usually an option to phone call. Had candidates complain about the times we offered for the interview, or complain about something in general. Ma'am, sir, this is an interview, not an emo trauma dump telehealth appointment. Next story. Comments that lack any self-accountability for whatever reason. The blame game is toxic. Taking credit for outcomes, appearing as the technical or organization lead, or even the individual contributor, born from a team's work, and not being able to speak to the critical details that led to success. Next story. Takes too long to answer the question and includes irrelevant information. This suggests to me they can't communicate, and I wouldn't want them representing our team in front of a senior executive. Next story. Complaining about past employers or the situation they happen to be in. I had one candidate who talked about being a trailing spouse for almost the entire interview, and then general lack of interest in the job duties, organization, etc. I don't expect a candidate to have done a deep dive, unless it's director level or higher position, but I do expect that they've done some basic research. Next story. As an interviewee, a big red flag is when the interviewer starts asking questions that start with, "Tell me a time." Those are the dumbest questions. Try just asking normal questions. Next story. My pet peeve is when a candidate tries to tell me something about the company I work for, like they have some type of inside knowledge, like an upcoming product launch, but it simply isn't true. Sadly, this has happened more than once. Next story. When the hiring manager lies about their own character and how they operate as a manager, and then it is totally different when they start managing the new employee. Let's flip this on its head a little and not just look at red flags for the candidate. Next story. Late is instant death. So is slovenliness. Dirty, messy beard, stubble, sweatpants, wearing their hat while inside. This is an etiquette breach. Lack of self-control. Low conscious restraint. Evidenced by bad nothing. Former employers. Sense of entitlement. Lack of ownership for any kind of struggle. It wasn't my fault. Next story. When the person blames other people for failures. When the person answers, "Why are you the best candidate?" by saying negative things about others. Next story. I learned to sell myself like a stockbroker selling stocks over the phone. And with that experience, now I judge the interviewer too. Sometimes their vibe is off and toxic. So, eventually, I'm the winner here. Thank you, stockbrokers, for the lesson in selling yourself. And above it all, stockbrokers are usually the wealthy ones. Next story. A junior person recently said to me, "I created a campaign that brought in $1 billion. I can't tell you the company. I'm under NDA. If you had done what you claim, you wouldn't be looking for a job after that contract ended."